Dr. Jackson, or Dr. J as we call it, it's quite fitting for you to be receiving an award in Michigan. This community is still in denial about your departure to USC, which was a decade ago. Dr. Jackson, your intellectual contributions, your students, and your leadership has changed the way people see Islam and Muslims. You helped establish a nationally significant institution right here in Michigan. And for more than 20 years, Alim has built the capacity of generations of American Muslims in critical thinking. You're an approachable scholar, grounded in community, and you've made a lifelong impression on students, many of whom are today's scholars. But you've also been open and receptive to being shaped by the students you teach. And that receptivity of having a two-way approach makes you an incredibly sought-out scholar and mentor. And Dr. Jackson, I've had the privilege of seeing you in action, whether it's meeting President Obama or eulogizing at Muhammad Ali's funeral, or as a bridge builder across sectarian lines helping draft the landmark Sunni Shiite Code of Honor. You have always exhibited the highest level of integrity. Your scholarship has been transformative, and your ideas are playing a critical role in advancing the inclusion of and within American Muslim communities. So thank you for your mentorship, and congratulations on being named the Peace Prize laureate for 2022. To accept this award tonight, Dr. Jackson's, on his behalf, Ustad Ubaidullah Evans will be receiving the award on his behalf. He's a longtime student, a mentee, and now a peer to Dr. Jackson. Thank you, Ustad Ubaidullah.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of God, the source of mercy and the giver of mercy. First of all, I would like to say that all of us here are praying for the speedy recovery of Dr. Jackson. May Allah give him good health. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala restore his health. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect him for all of that he have done for our community. I mean, I feel great honor that I have been given this opportunity to introduce Dr. Jackson with my dear sister, Dr. Hadi Mubarak. I remember the first time I met Dr. Jackson. I believe it was the ISNA convention, about maybe more than 20 years ago. And I couldn't help it to notice his elegance. Very elegant man. One of the first thoughts coming to my mind was, wow, this man really knows how to dress. Clearly, that is still the truth today. His etiquette and manners stood out, even more than his nice suit. Then I heard him speaking. It was then that I realized that he was not only elegant, but eloquent, with such a strong intellectual presence. Since I cannot be eloquent like Dr. Jackson, I have to try to be elegant as him, but I think I'm failing miserably in this one. And my children can testify to that. And he never shared his name of his tailor with me. Then I get to know Dr. Jackson closely. I developed such a strong friendship with him. He always been so sincere and clear, precise when he advised me. Every phone call between me and between us, me and Dr. Jackson, it started with light-hearted conversation. How are you, Imam Majid? How is your family? How are you, Dr. Jackson? How is your family? And somehow we always find ourselves transitioning to a deeper conversation about concept, intellectual argument regarding various subjects, which leads to the wheels turning in my head. He does that to all of you. For the rest of the night, and because there's a different time differences, by the way, between East Coast and West Coast, maybe talking to Dr. Jackson was 7 o'clock his time, 10 o'clock my time, then I lose sleep and miss my bedtime because of great thought that he shared with me. I just want to remind all of us here that Dr. Jackson have touched us in many ways. And those thoughts, those ideas that Dr. Jackson shared with me, it did impact how I think. And I shared those thoughts next day in my classes, in my lecture, in my Friday sermon. If you would like to know Dr. Jackson, ask his student about him. Dr. Jackson has several students in my community who have been really benefiting from great teaching of his. One of his students is Shad Imam, who fell in love with the seerah, the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him, because of Dr. Jackson. And many people fell in love with the life of the Prophet because of Dr. Jackson. Now, Shad Imam teaches seerah in my community. Shad shared with me and told me, Dr. Jackson helped me, Shad saying, helped me to understand that the teaching of Islam is not about knowledge and words, but it's about making it relevant to the lives of others. He always reminded me Islam is a process, not an event. Those are the actually notes that Shad took from the class of 2000 from Al-Alim program. I have taught several years at Al-Alim program with Dr. Jackson. And every time Dr. Jackson teaches his class before mine, I hear the student talking about how much Dr. Jackson class have transformed them and how much made them fall in love with the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Not Dr. Jackson, if you are in his class, he not only have very commanding voice, as you know. Those who come to El-Hibri class at 9 o'clock, you cannot go to sleep at 9 o'clock in the East Coast, hearing Dr. Jackson. Maybe it was my class. But he will keep asking the audience, do you know what I mean by that? Do you know what I mean by that? Dr. Jackson, you mean a lot to all of us. And may Allah preserve you and protect you. Finally, I would like to say that Dr. Jackson is one of the people I feel most proud of when I see him speaking about Islam or about Muslims community to the larger audience in the different platforms. Whether he's speaking to the President of the United States or he's pushing back against a former Prime Minister of England. You know what I'm talking about, Tony Blair. Yes. We can always depend on Dr. Jackson to stand his ground and to speak the truth. When others assume the worst, Dr. Jackson always brings the best in the conversations. Dr. Jackson, I'd like to thank you for standing your principles and sharing in the most eloquent, powerful way ideas and thought that bring about better understanding of Islam and Muslims. Dr. Jackson, this man from the tribe of Sudan, appreciate the man from the tribe of Philadelphia. Thank you, El-Hibri Foundation, for honoring Dr. Jackson and his contribution not only to the Muslim community, but to humanity. Before I leave the stage, Dr. Jackson, can you please share the name of your tailor? Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. Good evening. It's a blessing to be with all of you. In 1999, when I first attended the Adam Islamic Studies program in Concordia, Michigan, little did I realize that experience would set me on a trajectory to become a professor of religious studies 15 years later. I was the youngest student, a rising high school senior, sitting among college students in this large auditorium as I scrambled to quickly write down every last word of Dr. Sherman Jackson's lecture on Islamic law. I walked up to Dr. Jackson after his lecture one evening. I asked, I run track and cross country in high school, but my parents don't know if this is religiously permissible. Is it permissible? I asked. You see, this is what I mean by a culturally informed understanding of religion. An indigenous Muslim would not ask me this question, I recall him saying. While he didn't directly respond to my question, he brought my attention to a larger issue. Islam does not exist in a vacuum outside of culture, time, or space. My experience at the summer program was transformative. For the first time, I began to make sense of my identity as an American Muslim and my religion in a way that was historically grounded and theologically liberating. I no longer felt like I needed to choose between being an authentic Muslim or fully embracing my American identity. I now recognize this as a false dichotomy. I was so invigorated by the discussions at Adam that I attended again in 2000. This earned me the nickname Alim Rerunner. Several years later, I would find myself in a doctoral program at Georgetown University, engaged in the very critical and historical debates on Islam to which Dr. Jackson first introduced me. Instead of feeling disoriented or shaken by this experience, I felt an academic courage cultivated by my earliest experiences in Dr. Jackson's classes. I was not afraid to speak my mind or critique a position in our readings that I found to be flawed, biased, or plain inaccurate. I was unwilling to let biased arguments go unchecked. There was too much at stake. I recall sitting in a doctoral class titled Introduction to Hadith in early 2008. Our class had just finished reading an article by a well-known Orientalist scholar who claimed that a mass number of prophetic traditions known as Hadith were fabricated in the Sunni canon. A few Muslims sitting next to me shook their heads in disbelief. One of them said, I can't believe the Hadith are fabricated. My hand shot up. I intensely debated the author's theories, many of them ahistorical, baseless, and dependent on the problematic presumption that early Muslims covered up this fabrication. As a student of Dr. Sherman Jackson, I felt a sense of guardianship over the Islamic tradition. While this tradition is not impeccable, it is not a free-for-all dump in which any writer, scholar, or student could throw around any statement unsubstantiated by empirical evidence or lived realities. Dr. Jackson's scholarship revives the relevance of the Islamic tradition for those who hold the highest stakes in its production, Muslims. His scholarship models what it means to be a free thinker, unbridled by the hegemony of certain discourses, whether it be neoliberalism on one end or dogmatic traditionalism on the other. His sense of humor makes his lessons unforgettable. While giving us an analogy on how Meccan and Medinan culture differed in a class on prophetic history, he once described eating brunch at a fancy restaurant in Texas and being shocked to find that it served grits on its menu. You know what we call grits in Philly? We call it po' folks food. 20 years later, I still laugh when I remember that story. Beyond Dr. Jackson's wit, intelligence, eloquence, and brilliant scholarship, one of his most endearing characteristics to his students is his warmth. A few years ago, when I was visiting Los Angeles, I reached out to Dr. Jackson to pay him a quick visit. I was overwhelmed by his and his wife's hospitality as they served my husband and me an elaborate and delicious meal. Dr. Jackson is a sincere and selfless man, respected for his knowledge, eloquence, and unflinching courage. In many ways, he is the Muhammad Ali of the academic boxing ring in the field of Islamic studies in the West. When he flexes his intellectual muscles, he does it on behalf of the Ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam and on behalf of us all.
We're going to watch a video now from Dr. Jackson, so please give it up for the video.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm coming to you through this medium to express my extreme thanks and appreciation to all of you for the time, the effort, planning, and resources that you put into the enterprise of coming out to join us for the El-Hibri Peace Award celebration. I had approached this moment with great excitement and anticipation. For me, this was not going to be just an evening on which I received an award. It was going to be a reunion of sorts, where I got to re-establish relationships with old friends, to see old faces, to see people who have informed and shaped my life in various ways from across the country, to enjoy the benefits of brotherhood and friendship and community, all of this in the context of an El-Hibri event, which, as we all know, is always top-notch. Unfortunately, for the last 4 days, I have been hospitalized as the doctors rushed to try to redirect the progress of my condition from one that would lead to peril to one that could be managed and ultimately overcome. By lost permission, the doctors were successful. I have been restored to a place where my condition is manageable, and the prognostication is that, inshallah, I will enjoy a full recovery. It won't be short, it may not even be easy, but inshallah, it will be full. When I learned that I might not be able to join you this evening, I was really sad. And I was sad not only for myself, but also for the sadness that I knew that my absence would bring to the hearts of so many of you who sacrificed so much, moved around so many things, had to plan so many things to be at this event, only to discover that the awardee himself would not be present. I want to say to you that I apologize for any bad feelings, any disappointment that I may have brought to your hearts. And if apology is perhaps too strong a word, I just want you to know that I feel the disappointment that you feel, and I wish that I could remove it. But perhaps this is an occasion, another occasion, on which we can remind ourselves that at the end of the day, we are not in charge. What Allah wills will be, and what He does not will not. I want to end by thanking the El-Hibri Foundation, not only for this award, but for the graciousness with which they have handled this whole situation with my health. And I want to express a very special thanks to Farhan Latif. You know, events like this take so much work, so much planning. They are so stressful, so many phone calls, so many emails, so many arrangements, so many little things that can go wrong. And then to find out that at the end of this process of having devoted all of this time, all of these resources, dealt with all of this stress, to find out that the awardee himself will not be there, I mean, that's got to be a real punch in the gut. I'm very sorry for that. But I want to thank Farhan for the fact that rather than deepen my sense of guilt for not being able to be there, he made it a point to convey to me that despite all the work that he and countless other members of the El-Hibri Foundation have put into this effort, despite all of that work, I and my health was a priority over the event itself. That was very meaningful to me, and I appreciate that, Farhan, and may Allah reward you richly for your efforts, and may He bless the efforts of El-Hibri Foundation to move on to greater and higher heights. At the end, I want to say Alhamdulillah, and may Allah's blessings and His peace be showered upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Assalamu alaikum.
I will now welcome Nancy El-Hibri, Ustad Ubaidullah Evans, and Farhan Latif to the stage for the presentation of the 2022 El-Hibri Peace Prize.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. And now I have the daunting task of delivering something prepared by Dr. Jackson in under 5 minutes. Anyone who knows him knows that he would say he couldn't spell his name in 5 minutes. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I want to begin with the salute and an offer of sincere yet guilty thanks to my wife and family. The kind of thanks we offer to those who do things for us that we know we could not possibly deserve. While I am the one receiving this award this evening, they have contributed selflessly and in countless ways to everything that I have achieved over the years, often at the expense of what any family could reasonably expect from a husband or father. I have not the words to express the debt of gratitude I owe them, for I cannot calculate the magnitude of service that I have volunteered them to make. Yet, as the Prophet ﷺ informs us, whoever does not thank people is not thankful to God. So let me just say here, before the world, to my family, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. I must admit that when I learned that I had won the El-Hibri Peace Award, I was as surprised as I was happy. These feelings, however, soon gave way to a nagging fear. I know El-Hibri, and I know that they would expect me to come and speak not only about my work, but about myself. Not superficially, but really, down to the bone, as it were. Yet, if our present moment teaches us anything, it is that we cannot allow fear to be our guide, that we must push cowardice aside and say what needs to be said and do what needs to be done now, before it's too late. As for my work, among the most noted and perhaps controversial characteristics of much of it has been its decidedly American thrust. The society, by the way, not the government. My aim has been to place the grand, glorious, intellectual heritage of Islam, by all accounts, among the most accomplished in human history, into robust and meaningful conversation with the realities of America. Part of my project has been to reconnect Muslims with the transformative and life-affirming powers of their intellectual tradition, not to be slavishly copied and pasted, as if what worked in 13th century Baghdad will work in 21st century Dearborn. The aim has been, rather, to look to this legacy as a model of how Islam has always negotiated society. Our young people, and some of our older ones, need what I call Islamic literacy. Islamic knowledge that is not for the sake of simply being able to boast knowledge, but for the purpose of empowering them to come to terms with the realities they confront in their daily lives here in America. This American focus, however, was not always a part of my thinking. Growing up on the tough streets of Philadelphia, I was as alienated from America as anyone else in my neighborhood. We didn't necessarily hate America, but we certainly didn't see her lofty ideals reflected in our daily reality. Though we participated in such holidays as the 4th of July or even Memorial Day, beyond their celebratory trappings, which for us included gang colors, we wore white apples, those are hats, we felt virtually nothing. Added to this, when I converted to Islam in the late 1970s, I came under the tutelage of brothers from the Darul Islam movement, for many of whom Islam itself was part of a protest gesture against America. I remember that one of the most oft-repeated hadith back then was, whoever imitates a people is among them, من تشبه بقوم فهو منهم, which we took as a religious mandate not to identify with America. This gave my hostile indifference religious meaning, bordering on what almost felt like a religious duty. So what happened? I converted to Islam in 1978, By the early 1980s, I was in Egypt studying Arabic at the American University in Cairo and trying to increase my knowledge of Islam. There, I heard about this El-Hibri sheikh who was supposed to be the man in tafsir, or Quranic exegesis. Feeling entitled as a new convert in the lands of Islam, I decided to pay him a visit to see if he would take me on as a student. He explained that he didn't have time, but he directed me to 4 thick volumes, which he pulled down from the shelf and thumped down onto the desk all at once. These books were not on tafsir, but on the life of the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, As-Siratun Nabawiyyah, by the famous exegete and hadith scholar Ibn Kathir. He told me that if I was serious about the Quran, I would have to acquaint myself with the seerah, which he intimated all of the Prophet's companions and even his enemies knew as a matter of course. This, he insisted, was the real key to understanding the Quran. Upon engaging the seerah, really for the first time, one of the most riveting insights that came to me was the Prophet's thorough embeddedness in Arabian society, along with his tenacious attachment to his people. The Prophet's message was not an abstract system of menacing rules hovering above society like some alien UFO. It was a universal message that he directed to the concrete specificities of his society. Part of the whole point being to model to Muslims how they can and must do the same for every society in which they find themselves. The Quran spoke powerfully to such detailed specifics of Arabia as their burying their infant daughters alive and how they entered their homes upon returning from journeys. Obviously, the point was not to replicate these practices, but to send the message that Islam goes to society, not in the abstract, but in the concrete, and addresses it where it happens to be. Meanwhile, the Prophet's critique of his society was not that of a hostile, frustrated outsider, pushing his wayward society away, but of a self-confident, thoroughly invested insider, a co-owner of the Arabian project, who wanted to see Islam play its proper role in shaping the prevailing order and, if possible, bringing that order to a better, if imperfect, state of existence, warts and all. This engagement with the seerah was the beginning of a fundamental change in my thinking, though I was not entirely aware of it at the time. Contrary to what many think about the way I center America in my work, it was not and is not the fact that I was born in America that explains this orientation, especially in light of the war on terror and the vicious Islamophobia unleashed on Muslims after 9/11. Many Muslims and some non-Muslims see Muslims who take a less than rejectionist posture toward America as attempting to insulate themselves by currying favor with the dominant group in order to be seen as one of the good Muslims. While this is undoubtedly the case with some, it was emphatically not the case with me. First, for a Black American to try to ingratiate himself with America through the medium of religion simply makes no sense. Religion has never been able to trump race in America. And even if America accepted me as one of the good Muslims, that would not mean the end of anti-Black racism. Second, and perhaps more importantly in my mind, and in the minds of the Muslim brothers and sisters around me, I was a good Muslim, precisely because I did not fully embrace America. I remember, in fact, the hell we used to give members of Imam Warifdeen Muhammad's community, rahimahullah, for having the American flag on their newspaper. Truth be told, it was neither the fact that I was born in America, nor any desire to curry favor with the dominant group that drove this change in my thinking. It was the example of the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or at least my understanding of that example, that initiated the process of my moving away from rejectionism and toward the realization that neither I, nor Islam,
nor Muslims in general could assume their proper place in society, in a society to which they did not belong. Even if one's aim in engaging America was strictly for the purpose of da'wah or calling Americans to Islam, the Prophet's example suggested that one simply cannot guide a people whom one holds in contempt. I remember it must have been some 20 years ago, giving a presentation on Islam in America at a conference in Doha. Afterwards, Pastor Bob Roberts came up to me and said, okay, let me get this straight. You want an Islam that is absolutely true to all of its essentials, but that is at the same time American? Yes, I said. His response was amazing. Now, Bob is an empathetic friend of the Muslim community. So you can imagine what it must be like out there in the hinterland. But even for him as a friend, given the fundamental conflict presumed to exist between Islam and America, it was amazing for a prominent American Muslim to be talking about an Islam that is American. And let me be clear here, lest I be misunderstood. I acknowledge, in fact, I insist that there are conflicts between the vision of Islam and what is increasingly the vision of America. And all of this must be duly confronted, not pasted over or conveniently ignored. Yet, once again, no one who engages the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ can deny the depth, magnitude, and entrenched nature of the conflicts that separated Islam from Arabia, from the worship of idols, to women running around the Kaaba without clothes, to the initial treatment of the Prophet himself. In truth, however, my engagement with the Prophet's seerah ﷺ did not occur in a vacuum. It coincided with another major development that actually took me by surprise. As I mentioned, I was introduced to the seerah formally while I was abroad. It was also this experience of being abroad, however, that brought me to a realization that I am American. This had nothing to do with any patriotism, any more than me and my homies participating in Memorial Day or 4th of July celebrations did, or even our enlisting in the U.S. military, despite what some uninformed outsiders might think. Nor did it have anything to do with how I was greeted by the Egyptians. Cairo is a city of over 10 million people, and they never shut up. This is true, I know. Warm, humorous, engaging, and full of life, they fully embraced me and taught me more than I could ever measure, including a thing or two about the meaning and burdens of friendship. And certainly as a Muslim, there were ways in which I felt more at home in Egypt than I did in America, which is not to say that this is how my Egyptian friends always felt. I arrived in Cairo some 8 months after Sadat's assassination, when things were pretty tough for those bearded Sunnis, which is what they called openly religious men back then, Wahid Sunni. But for all the warmth and sincerity and Islamic brotherhood with which the Egyptians greeted me, I simply could not shake the feeling that I am just not one of them, even if on some days I might have wished I was. For example, when I had to deal with those goddamn taxi drivers. Again, this was not a matter of any conscious rejection on my part. It was simply an undeniable fact. It is not difficult to imagine how this realization reinforced what I thought I was learning from the prophetic seerah. Just as he was an Arab in Arabia, I was now to be an American in America. And yet, expanding his realization across the board has in recent years plunged me into an intellectual dilemma that I, in fact, we, as the American Muslim community, must find a way to come to terms with. Simply put, if despite my status as racial minority in a society that has been described as a racial caste system, the experience of being abroad could bring me to a more conscious awareness of being an American, it is reasonable to expect that the same experience of being abroad would have a similar impact on those who immigrated from the Muslim world to America. In other words, they too would come to a deeper realization that they were Egyptian, or Syrian, or Turkish, or Pakistani, or Indian, or Ghanaian. In fact, even Black American Muslims who have never had the experience of living abroad might identify with Philly, or Brooklyn, or Chicago, that's what's up, but not America. What we have then are experiences of being abroad, or not, that tend to push Muslims in mildly contradictory directions in terms of how they relate to America. And the question becomes, how can we wrestle this problem to the ground and end up with a sense of community that is both functional and mutually empowering to all? I do not know the answer to this question, but I think, once again, the Prophet's seerah might provide some direction. I wish I could detail at least one of the lessons we could draw from the seerah in this regard, but time will simply not permit this. In the end, at any rate, there are perhaps two visions for Islam and Muslims in America. The first was articulated by the public intellectual Van Jones. According to him, the American Muslims have been called to save a great faith and a great nation at the same time. The other vision is that of Sigmund Freud, who, when he visited America in the 1930s, described it as a mistake, a giant mistake. Freud did not believe that all the disparate peoples from across the globe could be fashioned into a functional political community. It is up to us to choose which of these visions will define our course as we move forward. In closing, I want to express my sincere and heartfelt gratitude to the El-Hibri Foundation, not simply for honoring me with this generous and prestigious award, but for the vision reflected in the very fact that such an award exists. It warms my heart to see a Muslim organization in America maturing to the point of recognizing the importance of valorizing and incentivizing the kind of work that everyone knows needs to be done, but only those who are driven by a very unique and abiding set of obsessions will generally do. Neither I nor anyone else who has received this award ever set out to do so. Rather, we do what we do because we cannot not do it. Just ask our spouses. The fact that El-Hibri has chosen to honor such efforts with public recognition is the stuff of which great civilizations are made. Civilizations that understand that those who seek recognition do not always deserve it, and those who don't seek it are often most worthy of it. This award has already strengthened my resolve and added to my hope regarding the future of our community here in America. In the name of myself, my family, and the entire Muslim community, I thank El-Hibri Foundation for this honor. May Allah continue to guide, strengthen, and bless your efforts. And may Allah's everlasting peace and salutations be upon our beloved Prophet.